time for that Christmas list again. Yes, indeed, this is the first Sunday of Advent, and so for the Christmas season this year, I thought we'd take a look at each one of the traditional Advent themes that have been drawn out of the Christmas stories in the Bible and explore how they continue to shape human consciousness for the good still today, how they're still relevant. You know, I can't think of too many other things in history that have had a larger or a more lasting impact on the world than these Christmas stories that we get from the Gospel of Luke, the Gospel of Matthew. It's profound. They are everywhere today in terms of their influence. And of course, if Jesus were around today, he wouldn't have a clue. He wouldn't have a clue about what we were all up to at this time of year. He'd take a look around and, I think the fact that Christmas has become this multi-billion-dollar global industry wouldn't really impress him very much, considering the things that he's recorded as saying about money and the accumulation of stuff and wealth and things like that. One thing he wouldn't be upset about would be this phenomenon. He would not be the least bit upset by people saying Happy Holidays instead of Merry Christmas. He just didn't have that kind of ego. He never set out to create a religion that had him at the center because Jesus wasn't a Christian. 100% Jewish through and through, which means that he saw the world a little bit differently from the way we do today. He saw the world through this lens of the Jewish scriptures, in particular the writings of the prophets. History had not been kind to the Jewish people. In fact, in the face of dark times, the prophets were there to offer them hope. Sure, there were the doom and gloom prophets who were saying that, we're all finished, it's the end, and there's nothing we can do about it. The kind of guys that didn't get invited to too many holiday parties. You may have run into somebody like that at your Thanksgiving table this year. It always seems that somebody's got a relative who insists on talking about politics or whatever it is. A lot of doom and gloom and that kind of thing. But there were those kind of prophets, but there were also the prophets who were kind of like, I kind of think of them as the early versions of life coaches. They were trying to guide the Israelites on how to attain their goals, how to bring about a better life for themselves. And I made this timeline here a few years ago in connection with a Bible class that I was teaching, and I think it really shows graphically why a little bit of good news and hope was necessary. It shows the ups and downs that were experienced by the Jewish people leading up to the birth of Jesus, and more downs than ups, as you could probably tell. Those nice seasonally appropriate red. Oh, we don't have red and green Christmas colors. It all got changed. Oh well. What's that? Yeah. Oh well. I had it all set up so it was color-coded, and of course sometimes when you transfer a slide into another format, everything, isn't that strange? Well, that's too bad, because all I can tell you is that out of that entire stretch of time, there were some very small pockets of instances where life was good for the Hebrew people, and for the most part they were either enslaved or conquered or being persecuted by other countries and things like that. So definitely more downs than ups. And yet the books of the prophets told them that the bad times wouldn't last if they were patient, if they would not give up hope. If they stuck to their teachings, then God was going to send this great leader to take them back to the glory days of the Empire of Israel under King David and his son Solomon, the glory days. And this leader was going to be the Messiah, the anointed one. And there was just one problem. These prophets were notoriously vague about who this Messiah was going to be and what he would do. According to some passages in the scriptures, this person seemed to be a warrior king who would lead armies and destroy the enemies of Israel, turn them back into an imperial superpower again. And other passages took the opposite approach. They described him as a priestly figure, a holy person who would bring peace and prosperity through righteousness. So, what was it going to be? Folks weren't too sure. Was it going to be a kingdom of material prosperity and power? Or was it going to be a kingdom of justice and mercy and peace? Either way, they expected this Messiah, one way or the other, to be a fixer. Someone who's going to come in and fix things, change things for the better. And that's what gave them hope during some very dark times. And that's why traditionally the theme for the first Sunday of Advent is hope. Hope's an interesting thing. A couple of different ways we can look at it. First, there's the cynical version of hope. We had a guest instructor when Karen and I were at Unity Institute, and he used to say that if he had his way, he'd get rid of the word hope. The reason he wanted to get rid of it was because he defined it this way, the cynical version of the word hope, defined as an emotional belief in a positive outcome despite overwhelming evidence to the contrary. And he used an interesting illustration that I've shared with you before. He said hope is a person who is falling off a 90-story skyscraper, and as he's falling, the people in the skyscraper at each floor can hear him say, "So far, so good, so far, so good," all the way down. That's his definition of hope. And I thought to myself, boy, that really beats the heck out of screaming all the way down, doesn't it? Which is probably what I'd be doing. It doesn't work for me. I like the idea of hope, even if it does seem to be a little bit unrealistic. I find that anything that might help to keep me a little more calm and focused in times of chaos and crisis might increase even slightly whatever slim chance of a good result that there might be. And so it's worth embracing something like that. Think about the alternative. When we say that something is hopeless, we sometimes call it a desperate situation. Desperate, despair, desolation, they all come from the same root word. Since when have those ever been good things? When we look at it that way, hope is good. Hope is a powerful alternative. Hope is also a major theme in a very popular movie that opened last week. A group of us went to see the second episode of The Hunger Games. The movie is set in a country that is being manipulated and controlled by fear. Fear brought about by brute force. And the president, who's actually a dictator, understands the power of hope and how hope poses a major threat to control by fear. Here's what he says about hope. He says, "Hope, it is the only thing stronger than fear. A little hope is effective. A lot of hope is dangerous. A spark is fine as long as it's contained." Sinister words. And if you're following the story at all, in the second movie, the spark of hope is starting to turn into a roaring inferno. And the source of that hope is a very unlikely character. The source of that hope is a 17-year-old girl. She's a good hunter, but she knows nothing about leadership. She knows nothing about military tactics or anything like that, which shows us that the greatest source of hope can often come from a very unlikely source. Jesus was probably the most unlikely Messiah that you could imagine. You don't have to do any kind of fancy Bible interpretation to see that the deck was really stacked against him. Let's see, he was an illegitimate child. The family home was Nazareth. It was a place regarded in those days as so obscure and out of the way that one of Jesus' own followers, one of his own students later on, was quoted as saying, "How can anything good possibly come out of Nazareth?" Wow, talk about a vote of confidence there. He wasn't born into a wealthy or powerful family. In the story in Luke, they were too poor and unconnected to find housing when they were visiting Bethlehem. So Jesus is born like a homeless person, essentially on the street in a makeshift shelter. Instead of engaging in political intrigue or teaching people how to fight and take back their country, he said, "Turn the other cheek. Give them the shirt off your back." Things like that. Hope needs to be a flexible thing. When someone suggested that Jesus might be the Messiah, well, there wasn't much flexibility back then. When someone suggested Jesus might be the Messiah, the Jewish people said, "No way. He's just like one of us. He's a nobody. Not flashy enough, right?" The priests and the Pharisees, they said, "No way, because he doesn't follow the law. He heals people, even on the Sabbath. He dines with sinners. He feeds the poor. Forget about him. He's too liberal." And then there were those who, instead of saying, "No way," said, "Why not?" They said, it's the politicians and the generals that got us into this mess in the first place. So this guy's talking about something different. Why not hear him out? Why not someone just like us, who understands what it's like to walk in our sandals, who doesn't think that the answer to every single problem is violence and revenge? And it was like a light bulb going on. Someone just like us. Imagine that. So instead of waiting for a superhuman fixer to come along, maybe we just need to follow the example of this wise and courageous teacher and take responsibility for our own liberation, not with outer violence and retribution, but by an inner shift of consciousness. I think if I wanted to summarize the meaning of Advent for me, it would be stop waiting. Stop waiting and get on with it. That's essentially what Jesus was saying. Stop waiting for someone to come along and fix you. Stop waiting for someone to come along and do all the things for you that are already in your own power to accomplish right now. All you have to do is change the way you think about things. The rest will follow. You think you have to kill your enemies. I'm telling you to love them. You think that every time someone does you wrong, you have to get revenge, you have to punish them. I'm telling you to forgive them. You think there isn't enough to go around. I'm telling you that if you give, it will be given to you in full measure, pressed down and overflowing. You think that God is a supernatural being far away, that the kingdom of heaven is someplace far off in space. I'm telling you that the kingdom of heaven is spread out upon the earth and people don't see it. God isn't far away. I'm telling you that you and I and God are one. Time and time again, that's the message we receive. So hope isn't about waiting. Advent isn't about waiting. It's about knowing that the solution is within our grasp, that we've already been given everything we need to liberate ourselves and to liberate each other. All we have to do is change our ingrained habitual ways of thinking. Nobody does that for us, not even Jesus. But what it takes is the courage of a warrior and the heart of a hero, because when we change the way we think about the world, well, sometimes it goes a little bit against the grain, doesn't it? I think the reason that these stories have such staying power is because they marked one of those important turning points in the evolution of human consciousness. People started to realize something that Unity author Eric Butterworth talks about in this quote from his very popular book, Discover the Power Within You. He said this, he said, "Civilizations have never been destroyed by outer conquest or divine fiat. Civilizations have risen and fallen by the rise and fall of human consciousness. The fall of Rome, for instance, was an inside job. If mankind is in trouble today, it is not because of the wrath of God, but because of the darkness in the minds of men. The kingdom of heaven is still within man, and the mind that was in Christ Jesus is in every one of us." The most common meaning of the word Advent, the one you see first in most dictionaries, is this one: the arrival of a notable person, thing, or event. The arrival. It's here. There's no waiting involved. So what we're seeing here is the arrival. Our Christmas stories are about the arrival of an idea embodied in a particular person in these stories. And it's taken the world a long time to finally understand that. There are many people in traditional Christian circles who think that Jesus is coming again, that he must finish the job the first time. He didn't succeed in fixing things the way everyone had hoped. I would politely and respectfully disagree. I think they're missing the point. I think the second coming is when we finally get it. When we finally get it, when we realize something that Eric Butterworth was talking about there, when we know that the mind that was in Jesus, or Christ Jesus, is also in every one of us. That's the real power. So maybe that's why Advent starts with the theme of hope, because this idea is still alive, it's here. And as long as there are people in the universe, then the idea can become a reality. And maybe in ways that we can't imagine right now. And the only reason we can't imagine it right now is because we're still stuck in old ways of thinking. Old ways of thinking about what the word God means, old ways of thinking about the significance of the life and teachings of Jesus. So I'm going to suggest that we look at Advent as a permanently open invitation. An invitation to change the way we think about those two things, and maybe a lot of other things too. That's what keeps it fresh and interesting, and maybe that's the reason why we come back to this season every single year and celebrate it with renewed fervor. We may not even realize why, but that's the power of hope that the season brings to us. So y'all can say Merry Christmas to me, Happy Holidays, Joyous Kwanzaa, Happy Hanukkah. I won't be offended by those hopeful and joyous greetings, whatever they happen to be. Today at 11:30, we're going to be getting together for a final discussion group to sort of bring some closure to our 7-week fall series, and we can talk a little bit about the theme from today. And then, of course, we have our parade meeting for next Saturday to get everything in order for this wonderful season as we kick off this beautiful and hopeful Christmas season. So hope to see you at one of those events, or maybe next week when we move on to our next theme, which is peace. See you then.